Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I think there is a lot in saying that Steve Biko was one of Africa's great leaders and visionary leaders. He was. And I think it is right that we should remember him and reflect on some of his great achievements. He reminds me of the Bible quotation about a good tree will be known by its fruit. Well, in Steve Biko, we had a good tree, and he was known by his good deeds. And it is right that we should remember him accordingly. In this quotation from Luke, it's saying, "For a good tree does not bear bad fruit, nor does a bad tree bear good fruit." I think Steve Biko's track record speaks for itself. He was a good tree, he was a good leader, and he did bear good fruit. We'd like now to listen to somebody who knew Steve Biko a lot better and what she has to say about him. Sorry, we don't have any sound there. Can we try again?
There's a Biniman song that goes, "Tell me what you really know about the great man, Steve Biko." Well, there's a lot to know because this man was extraordinary, visionary, brilliant, dangerous to a system built on fear. He shook that system so hard that they had to unalive him in one of the most brutal ways imaginable. In September 2025, almost half a century after his murder, South Africa announced it would reopen the inquest into his death. 48 years later, the truth still demands to be heard. They destroyed his body, but they could not destroy his brilliance. He never led an army, never fired a bullet, yet he led one of the greatest revolutions Africa has ever seen, the revolution of the mind. Steve Biko wasn't just a freedom fighter, he was an intellectual warrior. He believed liberation begins in the mind long before it reaches the streets. He called it Black consciousness, a philosophy that told Black people to stop seeing themselves through the eyes of their oppressors and to see their own strength, their own beauty, and their own power. The most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor, he said, is the mind of the oppressed. He didn't just talk about freedom, he taught people how to think free. Black man, you are on your own. It wasn't despair, it was a declaration of pride. Once a people stop waiting for validation, no chain can hold them down. He was witty, magnetic, and fearless. When asked if he hated white people, Biko smiled and said, "I'm against a system that turns people into gods and others into dogs." That was his genius: sharp, truth without bitterness, rebellion without hate. His words became fire. When the students of Soweto rose in 1976, their courage carried his philosophy. Archbishop Desmond Tutu said, "Biko was the spark that lit a flame no jail could extinguish." That flame spread across borders into reggae songs, UN speeches, and the 1987 film Cry Freedom, where Denzel Washington brought his story to the world. Steve Bantu Biko was born in 1946 in Johannesburg, near King Williamstown. His father died when he was 4. His mother, Duna, worked as a domestic worker, strong, faithful, and unbreakable. Even as a child, Biko questioned everything: the church, the state, authority itself. At the University of Natal, while studying medicine, he realized the real sickness was not in people's bodies, but in their minds. He helped form the South African Students' Organization and from it, the Black Consciousness Movement. But the regime feared him, feared his words, his mind, his influence. In August 1977, police arrested him. They tortured him, beat him, and left him naked on a prison floor. On 12 September 1977, Steve Biko, the voice of a generation, was gone. 30 years old. No justice, no apology. Yet his light never went out. Today his words echo through classrooms, murals, music, and protest chants. He taught that dignity is not given, it is claimed. That blackness is not a burden, it is beauty. That consciousness is freedom. I write what I like, he said. And what he wrote still stirs the soul of a continent, still tells the young to think boldly, walk proudly, and never forget their worth. Steve Biko, the man they feared, the mind they couldn't break, he didn't just fight for freedom, he became freedom.
Ben, what do you have to say to that one?
Good day to everybody. No, there's no doubt in my mind to say, a lot of sacrifices were made. A lot of gallant sons of Africa lost their lives to liberate Africa. And Steve Biko is definitely, right up there. And, the aspect that he emphasized and he dwelt on, I think is very, very important today. The power of the mind. You can be free, outwardly, but inside, your mind, you're in a dungeon. You are locked up. You cannot think beyond. You cannot see beyond, And this is what makes us human. Our ability to think. And if we cannot exercise that part of our minds and our brains, we become like animals. We are no different from a horse or that needs to be pushed towards something that it really needs. And we are finding this today, and the question that I would ask each and every one of us, and I would like us to answer honestly. Are we free up there? Are our minds free? Are we able to think for ourselves and not just think, but think clearly?
I think one thing I really admired about Steve Biko is his visionary approach to what is it we are fighting for. And the emphasis, as far as he was concerned, was to force people to think of themselves, to think for themselves. Whereas some of our leaders have never understood that aspect. To them, they want to control. They are obsessed about control. They want to control everyone. I think it's not an exaggeration to say in Zimbabwe, for instance, we ended white oppression only to substitute it with black oppression. Because Robert Mugabe and company never wanted the blacks to think for themselves. the ordinary people to think for themselves. He wanted to think for them. And that's what made it so different. Before independence, one of the biggest problems that infuriated most Zimbabweans out there was this tendency by the whites to say our blacks are happy. They are not interested in freedom. They are not interested in fighting for their right to a meaningful say in the governance of the country. Those ideas are brought in by foreigners. That has been the same reply by ZANU-PF after independence. If you call for free, fair, and credible elections, you are immediately labeled as a puppet of the West. You are being used by the West as if a black person cannot think for themselves. They will never address it as, oh no, you cannot call for whatever it is, freedom of expression, free media, or whatever, as an individual. As a black person, you must have been told by somebody else, which is fundamentally emphasizing the point that a black person cannot think for themselves. A carryover from the white regime's mentality. And the other point that Mugabe and company also made was that as much as the whites outright denied blacks a meaningful vote, a meaningful say in the governance of the country, Mugabe and company could not outright deny it, since it had been one of the key pillars in the fight for independence, one man, one vote. But what they did was to think of how can we make sure that we dilute it, that right, to the point of becoming meaningless, just symbolic. So we have been carrying out elections, and yet we all know the result is a ZANU-PF victory. Here is Margaret Dongo. I like this video because she is one of the few ZANU-PF leaders who have actually ever admitted that it was ZANU-PF political policy to keep the blacks, particularly in the rural areas, beholden to ZANU-PF.
They have wrong priorities, especially the current government. How can you go and build an airport which services a few people, and the majority are the elite and the so-called investors? Look at the rural. I made you come to interview me because I wanted you to have the experience of the roads that we are using. If we go today to our hospital there, you feel pity with that's a hospital in a rural area. If we go to our clinic, you feel pity. We have no piped water here. Do you know the reason why the rural people vote for ZANU-PF? One, they're intimidated. Two, the policy is that the rural people should remain poor and subservient to the government. They should remain poor, because if they remain poor, they continue singing the song for their master. This is why these people have been impoverished. It's for a reason. Because at the moment, if you economic empower these people, they'll go out of hand. ZANU-PF will never have control over them.
The difference between a visionary leader. A visionary leader empowers the people, whereas tyrants like Mugabe, Mnangagwa, and all these other leaders who have been ruling Zimbabwe, all they ever think about is how to consolidate power in their own hands. And that's all they care about.
You know, manipulation is a very, very powerful tool. You know, I'll give you an example. On a cold day, you are walking with a friend or somebody that is escorting you, and unfortunately, you had a wardrobe malfunction. You forgot your coat or something like that, and the other guy is all well equipped, and he says to you, don't worry about this cold. When we get back home, you're going to put on a nice big jacket and even have a nice hot cup of coffee or tea. And you smile and say, he just gave me words of encouragement. When I get home, I'll be okay. But yet, the same character that is telling you that has got two coats on him, which he could easily share with you. That is what manipulation is all about. To tell you exactly what you wanted to hear. That is another form of oppressing one's mind, keeping it, within a tunnel vision. You know, this is what we are seeing, especially in our politics in Zimbabwe. I mean, you look at the opposition; they got very, very nice words. They will tell you what you need to hear. Don't worry, the situation will be different after elections. We are going to win big. You're going to have so many jobs. Even, went as far as saying, Trump has promised us billions of dollars. We are going to clear everything and we're going to start from afresh. These are things that a hungry man, a man that is suffering would want to hear. And of course, after hearing such words and utterances, people, cheer and clap hands and so forth. All that is a lie. All that is manipulation. And until, we free ourselves and think clearly. Because I mean, look, Zimbabweans have been participating in rigged elections since a long time ago. And by now, you would have expected us to realize that it is futile to continue doing the same thing over and over, thinking we are going to get a different outcome. The opposition will not tell you the truth that this is what is happening. But we all know. We all know. This is the power of the mind. We all know deep down inside, no matter how much we get excited by the words that we hear and whatever we are told, deep down, our minds will correct the nonsense that has been input into us. But because we continue to close and to shun the truth, our minds will then begin to process it as the real truth. Powerful, it says, the more you lie to yourself, the more you will convince yourself that it is true. And that's very dangerous. And I think as Zimbabweans, we have gotten to that spot where we know elections are rigged, but we still want to go into that election knowing fully well the outcome. And when the outcome comes, it's no surprise. But then we tend to want to blame somebody else, except the person that manipulated us into going into this. And until I look at it and I say, Steve Biko, he brought out a very powerful message. one that the people of Africa truly and honestly needed: the freedom of the mind. Did he succeed in this message? My answer, today, when I look at what is happening within Africa, within Zimbabwe, my answer is no. That message did not go through, because we still have people that will not think. I could understand the people that are in the rural area, where things are bad. They're forced into some of these things. But the guys that are in the urban areas, the guys that are supposed to be learned, still don't get it. It's very unfortunate that we find ourselves in this position where, as Africa, we are lagging. We are way behind. Be it development, be it you know infrastructure, and just the mind. We're still backwards. We've got, it's weird where you take him to any of the European or Western countries, he adapts that you would want them to be. That freedom of the mind explodes. But when he gets back, he goes right back to where he was. It's like somebody that you have to teach a job every single day. No matter how many times he's done the job, you have to tell him, we're doing this, do that, take this, take that. That is where we are at. We need to free ourselves first before we even think of taking on the bigger things. Africa is meant to be great. Africa is great, but our people are the ones that are dragging it down. We cannot move forward until we unlock our mind.
I would like to conclude my presentation today and commentary on Steve Biko with the inclusion of the late Nelson Mandela. He was another visionary leader. I believe that Nelson Mandela's greatest legacy to the people of South Africa is that he delivered on the promise of freedom and basic human rights for all South Africans. As much as the regimes that have followed Nelson Mandela have proven to be corrupt, incompetent, South Africa has still managed to deliver on the fundamental rights such as free, fair, and credible elections, significantly free media, and an independent judiciary. That was Nelson Mandela's greatest legacy to South Africa. Countries like Zimbabwe, we are a failed state because tyrants like Mugabe and those who have followed behind him have undermined all the democratic institutions. We never held free, fair, and credible elections in Zimbabwe in 45 years of our independence. The media has never been free. In fact, some of the oppressive laws that Ian Smith had, Mugabe inherited them and practiced them, making them worse. The difference between a visionary leader in my view, is that a visionary leader is able to see beyond his own individual glory. What is good for the nation? The good of Rome is more important than the glory of Caesar. We are stuck with a corrupt, incompetent, and tyrannical regime in Zimbabwe that has put so much emphasis on consolidating power that it is now madness. We have now a situation where the ruling elite are spending millions, billions of dollars on cars and other luxuries for the ruling elite few, whilst the country basic needs like healthcare, education, decent roads are all neglected. That is the difference between a visionary leader and the likes of Emerson Mnangagwa, Robert Mugabe, and the opposition leaders that we have in Zimbabwe. My concluding remark will be the other tragedy is that we, the people, have failed to see that difference. And hence the reason why we've put so much emphasis on what we want our leaders to be, and we even believe that they are what we want them to be. There is no doubt that in Zimbabwe, the millions of Zimbabweans worshipped literally Robert Mugabe, at least in the first 10, 15 years of independence. And then they've turned around and started worshipping the opposition leaders. Many out there would still refer to Tsvangirai as an iconic democratic leader. We have some of our compatriots there calling the likes of Chamisa the change champion in chief. And yet when you ask them what changes he brought, they can't name even one. And this has only helped to make our situation worse. Because when you raise a corrupt, incompetent, and utterly useless leader on a pedestal where he becomes a demigod, he begins to behave like a demigod. And that's stifling the opportunity for meaningful change. My last remark to the people of Zimbabwe is you should go back and understand leaders like Steve Biko, Nelson Mandela, what made them great. And only then can you really seriously look back at our own leaders and force them to have those qualities. Think about it. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.